Hello, and welcome to Chicago Cultural Alliance's Meeting the Moment series. My name is Michael Scott, CCA Director of Programs, and I am joined today by CCA's Operation Director, Manager, and my colleague and session co-host, Pooja Das. Our session today, Organizing Programs for Strategic Grant Writing, the Umbrella Approach, will be presented by John Bateman, founder of nonprofit Sanity, LLC. Before we begin our session, we would like to answer the question, why Meeting the Moment? Why now? Meeting the Moment is a professional development series designed to support cultural and heritage nonprofits during a time of rapid change and uncertainty. Through hands-on workshops led by experienced sector leaders like John Bateman, the program provides practical guidance across key nonprofit functions, including marketing and communications, fundraising, finance, operations, and collections. Participants gain actionable tools, shared learning, and access to one-on-one consultations, with session leaders ensuring support is both strategic and tailored. Meeting the Moment equips organizations with clarity, confidence, and capacity needed to adapt, strengthen their operations, and continue serving their communities with impact. During the presentation, please be sure to use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen to share any questions that you may have throughout the session. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation to answer as many submitted questions as possible. You are also invited at the end to use the raise hand function, which is also at the bottom of the screen, if you would like to come off mute and ask your question as well, as Pooja just demonstrated. Also, please remain on the webinar until the very end to help us continue to improve this series by answering a few survey questions. This session is being recorded and will be archived on the Chicago Cultural Alliance website under Meeting the Moments, where you will also find many other valuable resources. We hope that you find this session and the sessions that will follow a supportive resource for you and your team for many years to come. Please welcome John to the digital stage.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Pooja. Let me share my screen. So I'll introduce myself briefly and talk about why this particular problem matters and how to go about solving this. So I've been in the space for nonprofits for about 20 years. I am a writer and an artist. I've been an executive director of a regional arts agency. I was the first ED, which meant that I spent 4 years going from helping an organization go from a volunteer-run entity to being the first staff person to seeing the second staff hire. I've worked with private family foundations and family offices on the grant making side, and I've worked on the nonprofit side, mostly for arts and cultural organizations seeking grants, strategy, compliance, and other operations needs. So what we're talking about today is taking an umbrella approach for organizing programs for strategic grant writing. And the goal for today is to help you view your work holistically rather than as a series of separate individualized efforts. Identify overlaps across multiple initiatives and group related efforts under a broader program umbrella. The goal then is to seek funding at that umbrella level for larger funding requests and to minimize any funding gaps you might have. So why this matters? There's a need for efficiency of time and resources. We're all strapped for time. Whether you're staffed or it's your board or volunteers, time is limited. Writing 10 applications is inherently easier than writing 20. With the unpredictability of funding, and if you're writing 20 grant applications that are highly specific, you're going to have declined grant applications. And so if you can consolidate your work under larger umbrellas, then it's easier to approach some of these project grants to cover more of your operations, your programs, and your expenses. This is really important to consider because obviously restricted grant funding limits what expenses are covered. And so if related initiatives or related efforts are treated as a similar program or under one program, then they can share those expenses. So here's the problem. Imagine this. You land several project grants. One grant is for an after-school program. One grant is for a one-day family event. A third grant may be for arts and craft supplies. All these grants are awarded. You've signed the agreement. They're restricted to certain expenses the way you described them in the application. A volunteer shows up at your door or at one of the events with a cargo van full of art supplies for the entire year. That's amazing. It's covered all your needs for the year. But you now have grant money that you may not be able to use. What happens? This is because your grants, for example, grant number three, if it was for arts and craft supplies, you just got the in-kind donation that covered all of those supplies. If you had supplies and expenses for your other grants that involve supplies separately, those are now covered. So what happens to each grant? Will the funder let you change that grant and cover your other expenses, or will they require you to return unused funds? Here's the benefits. If you've aligned similar initiatives that share goals and expenses under a larger, more cohesive program, not only does it simplify your grant writing, but you can seek fewer, or you need to win fewer larger grants to cover all those related expenses. These related expenses are consolidated under one grant or maybe two instead of five, and it helps reduce potential gaps in funding by ensuring more of your expenses in your work are covered. So if you apply for one separate grant for one separate thing and it gets declined, if your other grants aren't covering it, then you have a gap in your funding.
Sorry for the interruption, John. I just wanted to make sure everyone knows. Please drop your questions in the Q&A box. We welcome you to do that. We'll save time at the end for these questions. We'll read them all, and also at the end, you have the option to do the raise hand function, which you'll come off mute and then ask your questions directly to John. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm going to share a story. This is what happened to me, especially when I stepped in. This was my first fiscal year as an executive director. We ran a lot of initiatives and programs. Um, these were all the different things that we did. We ran a festival, we had a community event, we ran workshops, we had a family park event. We did an after school program, we had an exhibition, we also gave awards. We went from a volunteer board where board members were involved in writing grant applications and volunteers were running each initiative. Everything was treated as a separate program. Here's what happened. With one of these grants, it was highly restricted. We had to provide receipts. It was a reimbursement grant, and we could only get up to the receipts we spent. We had a donor show up with a bunch of art supplies that fulfilled a lot of these programs. So that funder, when we went to document the grant, we had already received the money, but then we had to document it with receipts. So it wasn't a reimbursement grant. I misspoke there. We had to return half of the funds for that grant because they would not transfer that grant to other purposes. That became a critical problem because in that same year, this was before COVID, we had to cancel a major outdoor event because of an electric storm. So we lost revenue. We were in a critically uh, dire position with needing revenue, and we had to return grant funds because of how the grant had been written. So everything, almost everything we did, we had a couple of general operating support grants, but we had very few broad encompassing grants. So I took everything we did, and this is how we reorganized. We ended up putting everything in two programs. One program we called the Creative Economy. This covered our business skill workshops for artists. This covered a major outdoor festival. This also covered our gallery exhibits. Our second program, we realized that the common thread was arts education and community outreach. We pulled that together under one umbrella. This is where we put our after school art program. We had the one day family event program, random pop-up booths at community events where everything was free, and then our awards that we gave for summer scholarships. We wrote grants at that umbrella level, and this changed everything. In fact, our first NEA grant that we landed, we wrote it at this for arts education and outreach, and we received a substantial matching grant that covered all of those things under that main program umbrella. We worked with a bookkeeper who also then helped us keep each item under that program area as a subcategory in QuickBooks. This is where you need to talk to your bookkeeper and your accountant. I can't advise you on how to do that, but they'll be able to walk you through that and what it looks like for reporting. So I'm going to show you how to get there. This is just one suggestion to map it out. I have a worksheet for you there's a copy of it in this presentation, and CCA will also provide that afterwards. Make a list of everything you do, just like a grocery list. Describe it in one sentence. We have an art gallery where we sell artwork for our artists and take a 20% commission. That's one. Two, we run an outdoor family event in the park with art booths, family engagement, free musicians, free art activities. That's two. After you compile your list of everything you do, go back through this list. Off to the side with each item on this list, now go through and make a list of 1 to 2 word descriptions that describe that thing you do. Are they art lessons? Is it public readings? Is it youth classes? Is it some form of award or grant? Is it an outdoor festival? Is it a travel experience? And make as many of those as you can. This is a way to brainstorm and do a mind map of all the different ways you might describe that thing you do. The fourth step will be go back through that list. Where do you, of the list of the phrases, where do you find the overlap? What things are in common with the items that you've listed? Circle those. See what comes up. See how many there are. Can you associate those as a larger program? Here's what the worksheet looks like that I've given you. You can adapt this to whatever you need and whatever works for you. Keep in mind that uh, on here I've have you a spot to list your mission statement. This is not a way to go outside of your mission statement. This is not a way to game the system. Everything you do still needs to be consistent with your mission. And so the way you organize your initiatives and your work into programs needs to remain consistent with that mission. And so that's just a gentle reminder of keeping you on path so you don't have a mission, what's called a mission creep outside of what you're doing. So I'm going to go through some tips here. Remember to stay consistent with your funder guidelines. This is not going to work or change anything with some of the grants that you receive. There are some grants out there that are highly specific to certain items, and this is not going to change what you can seek from those funders. This is more likely to help with funders who have broad, sweeping, high-level categories like art education, historic textiles, some category that will encompass a wide range of activities, humanities grants, uh, for example, some of the project grants with the Illinois Arts Commission, uh, or sorry, the Illinois Arts Council. Uh, the National Endowment for the Arts has broad sweeping categories. This is where this is going to help the most. Make sure you're sharing this with how you want to organize your experiences with your bookkeeper and your accountant. The goal is so that not only is your program organized in a way for grant writing, but that your books are also organized so that reporting becomes quick and easy. Your bookkeeper and your accountant can help you set this up. I had a client who every year was spending 15 to 20 hours going through a bank statement and a general statement of activities out of QuickBooks that had no categories and no subcategories, trying to compile from memory what each expense was related to and where they spent it. Working with your bookkeeper and accountant is an important part of this because they can help you set up reports that might be simply the click of a button and a final review. I also find this helpful when you are working with volunteers and board members as secondary readers for these grant applications. I always recommend that when an organization is writing grant applications, that at some point they task a board member with doing a second read. It helps the board member understand not only the narrative that they are sharing with these funders, but the work that's required, and it helps ensure that one person isn't overloaded in March with 5 applications and doing a complete review solo. When you're working with 10 to 12 grant applications instead of 20 smaller ones, this does make that job easier when you're trying to spread the work around your volunteers and your board members. Michael, I think we have gone through most of what I want to cover now. I think this would be a great time for Q&A,
Sure, yeah.
to sort of anticipate what people might ask, and maybe I can use some more stories there.
Yeah, yeah, and we welcome anyone who has questions for John. Of course, if you're familiar with John, he's a very close. He works very closely with the CCA and has helped us with grant writing. He helps many of our members with grant writing, and so he's a great resource to ask questions on the information that has been provided today during this. And I believe we could open up to just general questions, even outside some of the scope of things that you've covered today. So, if anyone has any questions they would like to come off of mute and ask, please use the raise hand option. And also, if you want to just drop your question in the Q&A, that would be great too. Um, I maybe John, just while yeah, I was just going to ask you to do that. That's funny. I was going to say maybe go back to the worksheet and maybe go through some steps and give some examples of the kinds of things that folks may insert in these different columns and what kind of uh, ideas and concepts they're trying to capture by working with the sheet as it is.
Sure, maybe I'll just go back to um, the mess that I inherited. And feel free to interrupt me if there's any questions.
No, I think it's okay to go ahead and go through this part, and then well, there is one question, but we can hold that until you kind of go through, kind of recap a little bit. We did have several folks who joined after the start as well, so
Okay.
I think that'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Let me close that. Uh, I'll start with this slide. So everything on here, when I started at the Arts Council, everything was treated separately. Everything that we did was subject to a highly individualized grant. And that was the result of how the organization had grown when it was using board members as volunteers. We had a very active board where uh, I will say 60 to 80% of the board was very active, and board members would take on a specific grant application for the event that they managed, that they supervised. And so I'll take arts education and outreach because that one worked the best. With the creative economy program that we did, we found that there were a lot of funders that would fund one of these but exclude the other. And it just was a matter of learning which funders resonated with the work that we were doing. The most successful part of this was the art education and outreach, where we started winning national grants because this also created a bigger impact in terms of numbers. If when each one of these, for example, Art Partners was the name for our after school program, that served 100 youth. Art in the Park was a 1 day family art festival that served 400 people. A community outreach was anywhere from a couple of hundred to 1,000 per year. The summer art scholarships ranged from 20 to 50 per year. Treated individually, that showed low numbers, and it was an incorrect description of our impact through all of that work. So when we talk about how we organize this, I'm going to go over to the slide. So for example, here with art education, with the after school program, some of the attributes were art education. Some of the attributes were serving youth. Others were youth at need. Um, the same with the art in the park, the one-day festival that we did. It also was a free public event. It was in a park that was co-located near a community of high need. It reached youth and families. It was art education. It was family engagement. It was hands-on art activity. And so as we started making a list of all these attributes, we started seeing some commonalities, which were the way we engaged with the public, the way we engaged with youth, th- who the youth were that we were engaging with. I'm going to hit pause for a second because we have a good question here. We don't have large grants. Do you recommend slowly scaling up by combining it or doing it all at once? Honestly, I would take this worksheet and look at everything you're doing. You may find that you have a lot of things that can be grouped together with just the way you describe it. But you won't know that until you start going through this exercise. I think for us, the art education and outreach was the one we did that was a change in one fiscal year. At the end of that fiscal year, we reorganized everything immediately. The festival and the creative economy, that took a couple of cycles to get it right. But we merged all of those programs. Our fiscal year is June 30th, and when we went to July 1st, everything was under this umbrella all at once. And it was simply a shift in the way we described them. It was calling out the commonalities. It was identifying everything that they shared in common with the goals, which stayed consistent with our mission. And so you potentially can do it all at once. It just depends upon what the work is that you're doing and what you find.
Great.
And we have a question, would you be talking about specifics as well? If there's something specific that you have in mind with that question, please feel free to add that into the chat.
Well, we have a person raising hand, Will Miller. If you would like to come off mute.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Great. I had two separate questions. First being related to this topic, how do you view partnering with other organizations as it pertains to grant writing and this umbrella approach? And then the second, I asked a question yesterday, and I think you were sitting next to Ellen. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. But I'm Will Miller from Quinn Chapel, sort of in a similar position as you around taking a volunteer organization into more of a, I guess, lack of a better term, professional approach with potential paid employees. Wanted to get your thoughts around, best practices as we go through that process as well.
Thank you. That's a great question, and it's an important thing to consider. And for me, that folds into the storytelling. So I'll give you an example here. So um, the first two, Art Partners and Art in the Park. Art in the Park, I'll talk about first. That was a collaborative event. We were the lead organization. And so the funders we approached with that, we identified ourselves as the lead organization. We could not write grants to those funders for expenses incurred by other organizations. But what we shared was the fact that these other organizations were supporting this event, which translated into in-kind support for us. And we also elaborated on how a grant to us as the lead for that event created a ripple impact because the more our event was supported, then that meant these other organizations also benefited from it. And so that's with collaborative efforts, there are some funders that will will award grants for collaborations. You just have to look at the guidelines. If they don't fund collaborations, it's still a relevant point to raise. And it talks about the support that your event is getting from the community, from these other entities. And I have seen funders especially when I have conversations with them, they like to see that. They don't want to see us working in isolation, just like we don't want to see funders not talking to each other and sharing better ways of hosting a grant process. Art Partners was the same. Um, in some aspects, because with Art Partners, we paid for the art teacher to go to a community center to provide these free art classes. So we were providing the in-kind support to that other entity, which allowed them to focus on their non-arts related work, like nutrition classes for the kids, um, physical activity, STEM classes, things like that. And so it's still relevant to your story. It's just the particular dynamics of that collaboration.
Will, did you have a follow-up to that or any kind of a response? Just making sure before we move on.
That's truly helpful. I guess the second half of my question was around, as you're talking through this, if there's any tidbits that you think of related to that transition as the first director, moving the organization from a volunteer organization to, an organization with paid employees, tidbits there would be helpful.
I think the for purposes of this webinar, when we're talking about grant writing, I think the best suggestion I can give is engaging a couple of board members in the process. So that, let's say, for example, you are the executive director and you are the one writing these grants, tapping different board members for different applications to be a second pair of eyes. And that's not always possible to do that for every grant application. I found that most useful for key important applications like the State Arts Commission, the National Endowment for the Arts, uh, and other large grants and events. So when we started writing for arts education and outreach to a couple of funders, when we were asking for a sizable sum, tapping a board member to be the second pair of eyes on that. And that helped in a lot of ways. It helped with board engagement. It helped me as the executive director. It would help you as executive director manage the story with your board so that they see how you're describing the work so that they can also describe it the same way. It also helps them to understand the significance of you have to have an organization budget. If you don't have an organization budget written down, then it becomes extremely difficult to land grants. And so that's a good step in going from volunteer run to that next phase of teenage growth is one way to describe it. And I think we could have a conversation around a lot of different other strategies around how to make that transition. And a lot of it is board management. And so I want to stay with this for the grant writing, but I'm happy to connect with you on some of the other ideas and questions you might have in other ways to how to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. We have a question from a member. When program umbrellas include both free community access and earned revenue, tickets, class fees, for example, how should we frame that in a proposal so it reads as sustainability, not mission drift?
That's a great question. What I did not show on this slide is two events that we identified and realized were fundraising events. We had a separate category for fundraising. Our arts festival under the creative economy that charged a booth fee. We earned revenue through the gallery sales and disclosing it. And it might be that what you find is that you need to separate your free programs from your fee-based programs. But you won't know that until you sort of take a look at it across the board. That's not necessarily true, because that's what our business skill workshops were free, but our festival was not free. But disclosing it and looking at it from the perspective of we have this program, we have some classes that if it's a sliding scale, if it's some are fee-based, if you have some things that are free, just disclose that in your grant application. Um, all of our education and outreach programs were free from us. I think we learned we ended that relationship, but one of the after school programs we had worked with, we did not realize at the time was charging a fee for youth to engage. And so we ended up changing that relationship and finding a different partner that did not charge their youth.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question from a member here. How would you deal with volunteer pushback that an event was their project or idea and their grant, and now you want to combine with other grants?
That sounds like an interesting relationship management question. How would I deal with a volunteer pushback that an event was their project idea and their grant? It sounds like you have a volunteer that is forgetting the forest for the sake of a tree. It sounds like a relationship issue with this volunteer, whether a board member or not, that you're looking at this from the perspective of the mission as a whole and all of the work that the organization does for the sake of sustainability. And so in that instance, I would talk about how the benefits are for evaluating whether a particular project needs to be combined with other projects for purposes of grant writing. It doesn't mean that that specific project loses its identity. So in looking at this slide, for our arts education and outreach, every single one of those things had its own identity. This was a matter of how we shared expenses across all four of them. Usually, I find that when I received pushback and reminded of the bigger mission and the benefits of it, that's when that's when my board members or my volunteers started to understand, oh, I see what you're doing now. And I think there might be a fear that this volunteer has that this project that you're doing is going to go away. And that is a separate conversation entirely from how do we write strategic grants to cover more expenses.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question, but they're coming in now. Just a reminder, everyone, please add your questions to the Q&A, and we'll continue answering these. We have a good amount of time for a great conversation. Next question is, in your experience, how is grant evaluated in relation to organization size and also to having a physical presence such as a site?
Every funder I've ever encountered is different, and I always value the funders that are willing to talk to the organization. I find that there are funders in Chicago that are absolutely willing to talk. They will host open sessions to ask these questions. Um, I've submitted grants to 3 or 4 state arts commissions, and I find that the staff at state arts commissions, uh, when they have time, are incredibly valuable to have some of these conversations. Um, the NAA used to be. I don't know what's going to happen with them. Um, and so part of our job in seeking grants and building these relationships is really understanding where the warmth is, who is our audience. And sometimes we encounter funders that we think, oh my gosh, we are a perfect fit for them, but we might not be. And so it's a matter of looking for the funders. And sometimes that requires submitting an application or two before getting on their radar or having a conversation with them? And that's a great question to ask a funder is how do you evaluate our grant proposal based on our size and whether or not we have a site? So when I ran the Arts Council, we didn't have a building. We had an office. Everything we did was somewhere else in the community. And we managed to sustain ourselves on a budget that varied from probably the average was 150, somewhere between 150 and 175, 150,000, 175,000 a year.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. For a chapter-based organization like ROCO, education, arts and culture, business, medicine, medical, teens, fun, how many umbrella programs is right-sized for grant strategy 2 through 4 or 5 through 7? What's the point where umbrellas become too broad?
That's really going to depend upon your mission. I realize that some, especially new organizations, are going to try to do a lot of different things, and sometimes it's not going to be a quick answer overnight. Sometimes you have to figure out what works best with your community. Um, we had to drop a program when I was at the Arts Council. We had a college scholarship fund, and the interest in that surprisingly waned. And promoting it, and we just ended up where we were not getting applications, and we realized that that limited amount of money could help more youth with summer art scholarships than a small scholarship. And so there's not a quick and easy answer for what's the right size. It really depends upon what's your mission, what are you doing. If you have if you came to me and you said, John, we're running 7 different programs, I would want to take a look at that and see if you truly have 7 different programs, or if you've just organized it that way and there's a stronger way to describe the work you're doing. But without going through a worksheet and sort of a brain exercise, it's hard to assess that.
Here's another comment and question. Thank you for sharing your expertise. I am a cultural program curator at a nonprofit dedicated to promoting Spanish language and the cultures of Spanish-speaking countries. About 90% of our cultural programming is free and open to the public. Although we are a local nonprofit, many foundations tell us we are not eligible to apply because our institution receives operational support from the government of Spain. How might we better frame our storytelling or positioning so that foundations could consider supporting our public cultural programs?
Thank you for that question. I think you're approaching the wrong foundations. I work with some organizations that receive funding from other governments. And so I think it's looking at broaden your search. I know, for example, the Illinois Arts Commission does not have that, Illinois Arts Council does not have that restriction. Um, I'm wondering if these foundations are confused as to whether you're an independent entity. If they think that you are an agency of the foreign government, that might be one of the issues. I just don't know without looking at how you're describing your work and your structure. Um, and so I think broadening your search will really help. Can you please share some names? So CCA has a member wire library that is a library of about 100 opportunities in the grant making world, as well as some capacity building resources that are free. Go through that library because that has been curated to look at what is a stronger fit for members of CCA. And the Chicago Cultural Alliance can make sure you have access to that. That's where I would start.
Yeah, thank you, John. And maybe we'll take a quick look at the Airtable sometime during, our last
Okay.
15, 20 minutes here.
Michael,
Um,
I just saw a question. I do want to make sure I'm clear on this slide. So, you picked out right grants at this level, program one. Can you explain why this is more desirable than program two? That is not picking one over two. Really, I could have had two arrows, but I can't point on the screen. But it's writing, it's not one is not over number two. Those are on the same level. So if you're seeking funding to support festivals and workshops and galleries, we wrote a grant covering all three of those under the creative economy. If we were seeking funding for our arts education and outreach, we wrote it at this level for the umbrella under arts education and outreach. So neither one of those is over the other one. They're on the same level, and it's just picking which program we wanted to support.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Here's another question. This is a bit generic, but my organization is fairly new and just started the process of applying for grants. I personally don't have much experience and would love to hear your suggestions as to what the best steps are in approaching this initial process.
Particularly for new organizations or organizations that are new to seeking grants, I suggest looking at um, I sometimes I call it the usual suspects, but looking at general operating support funders who have broad um, guidelines. So, for example, the State Arts Commission, apply to that. If you are in the city of Chicago, submit to DCASE. If you do any sort of work that is humanities based, whether it's like an artist talk or a film screening where you have a panel with the filmmakers, Illinois Humanities Council, or I'm sorry, Illinois Humanities. Um, some of the common funders, and start with something that's not going to overwhelm you. So start with like three to five, and then plan to stick with those each year. Submit each year, whether you get it or not. And my general rule of thumb is I want a funder to say no three times before I give up and go to a different funder. That's not a hard and fast rule, but sometimes I feel like the first application is often the introduction, especially if a funder won't speak to you. If a funder will speak to you, or if they host webinars for their grant programs, take advantage of that before you fill out an application. Give them a call or attend the webinar and see if they are a good fit for you. But if you're new or just starting out, give yourself three to five to do this year and do those again next year. And then as you start winning the grants, just add another one each year until you have I like to recommend a portfolio of about 10 to 12 at least. This is really for smaller organizations because if you're larger, you can handle more. But 10 to 12 for smaller organizations means you're averaging about one a month. And that seems to be manageable if you can also delegate with a board member.
Great, great. All right. Let's see. I'm going to the list here, just kind of looking. Here's a question. Is there a hard and fast rule with writing grant applications? What should I include?
The, Thank you for the question. There's no hard and fast rule. What I recommend, and there is another session that I'll conduct later this summer, is to draft a common narrative. I don't use the phrase boilerplate. A lot of folks do, but drafting your story up front, having a handful of documents ready, you'll have to have an organization budget. Very rarely will any funder give you a grant if you don't have last year's budget or last year's, sometimes they call it profit and loss, sometimes they call it a statement of activities, or a current budget of what you forecast you may spend this year. So, a draft of a narrative of what you do, the history of your organization, your board members, a budget, your IRS determination letter. That's the letter that gives you 501(c)(3) status. Um, But it's really going to come down to the funder. And anytime they offer a webinar to review their grant application, absolutely sign up for it, especially if you've never applied to them before.
Thank you. Thank you. Um, Here is, let's see, it says, view your work holistically rather than as a series of separate individualized efforts and identify overlaps across multiple initiatives. The question is there a way to lay everything out, a good way of looking over everything to make this job easier?
I'm going to go to this worksheet that I drafted for you, and this is a good way to start it. You don't have to use this form, but the goal is to make a list. I recommend make a list. If it's a mind map, if you're drawing arrows and pictures, whatever works for you, but make a list of what you do. Describe it in one sentence, each thing you do in one sentence, and then do a brainstorm, a word association. What are the attributes that you associate with each thing you do? If it takes you 5 pages, lay it all out in front of you and start circling the ones that come up the most frequently and see if it makes sense to group those together.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And we'll be sharing, if we have not already, the worksheet to everyone who registered. And we'll also make it available through the resources page for meeting the moments attached to this particular recording. A couple more questions here, a few more actually. Great. Thanks everyone. Again, just a reminder, please drop your questions in the Q&A box if you have any, or you can also raise your hand and come off. If it's a little more complex or layered question and you want to have a interaction or engagement with John, please raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute and have that conversation directly. Sometimes it gets a little bit lost in the chat, and we want to make sure that we're answering everything fully that you're asking here. The next question is, what are funders most likely to trust? Attendance counts, retention, pre-post surveys, qualitative stories, partner validation, or something else? And what combination is enough for a small team?
Thank you for the question. I've never had a funder challenge any organization that I've worked with on their attendance numbers. Um, some of the best feedback that we've gotten was off the cuff at an event with a short, small piece of paper with 5 questions on it. And I found that to get a really good quotable feedback story, um, we'd have to go through, if we gave out 200 of those little pages, we'd probably get 5 to 10 quotable pieces of feedback. And I've never had a funder question us on that. Um, and some funders want attendance counts. Some funders want the qualitative feedback. There's nothing wrong with soliciting feedback. Not telling someone what to say, but asking whether it's a friend or a board member or a family member, hey, you went to this event of ours. What did you think? Can you send me an email that I can use in a grant application? There's nothing wrong with that. Uh, Sometimes we have to be proactive to get feedback at all. And that really, I haven't had any funders challenge on that, especially in arts and culture, because it is, how do you measure the quality of life that comes out of arts and culture events? These are not healthcare grants, these are not scientific studies. And so I think a lot of it does boil down to the qualitative impact in addition to attendance counts. Um, Something I've seen some funders like or zip codes. They want to make sure you're not just pulling the same people. Um,
Great job. Thank you. Another question here. What are the best websites, platforms, or subscription services to stay up to date on all available grants for nonprofits focused on art, culture, and education, whether free resources or paid services? And I'm wondering if this might be a good time to take a quick look at the Airtable. I know that Pooja has pulled it up, and we can bring that up if you want to explain that a little bit, John, and maybe help folks. So
let's
Pooja,
do
if you'd
that. That'd
like
be
to.
great.
Great. Pooja, if you don't mind bringing up that. Thank you. Thank you. And feel free, John, to explain as you wish.
Yeah, so this is a curated library hosted by Chicago Cultural Alliance, and it includes a library. It's about 100 grant opportunities, and I don't know, a number of capacity building resources. And it can be filtered by resource type. It can be filtered by deadline. Pooja, can you click on the filter on the right side? Uh, right side to the, yes, thank you. Under add condition, if you just click on that, um, and then where that name of opportunity, there you go. Thank you. Um, this gives you several different search options in terms of like type of deadline, the name of the opportunity, um, approximate deadlines. But this is a great starting point because this has been curated with the eye for CCA members. And we're always open to feedback on this. I'm the one that compiles and puts this together. It gets updated roughly monthly. Some of the deadlines in here you will see maybe past. They stay in here to help you plan ahead for next year. And some of these may disappear when we learn that they're not really that conducive to the organization, the members of CCA. But this is where I'd start. You already have access to it. CCA can help you get access to it. Um, there's a lot of paid subscriptions out there, but if you're a member of CCA, start here.
Great. Great. Do you have some ideas, maybe for the paid for those? Because I know that we this is these sessions are open to non-CCA members, CCA adjacent folks as well in the community, and maybe share some of those paid opportunities or paid sites that they might be able to join if they're not a member at the moment.
I'm honestly not a fan of most of them. Um, One of the challenges I have found is the entries are written so broadly, it's hard to really get a gauge for whether they fit. And so I tend to look at lists that are posted by other organizations, particularly like sometimes Arts Midwest will have some. I look at who is funding in Chicago. There's one, I think it's called Grant Finder, that's a paid one. Um, Grant Advisor is another one. The names might be blurring together, but I haven't found one that I really like yet. And part of the problem that I find in talking about this with colleagues, particularly for individual artists, is a lot of these lists are not maintained or curated in a meaningful way. And so, particularly for individual artists, coming up upon a list and clicking on the opportunity and you realize like they stopped giving grants to individuals like 5 years ago. And it's so that's what I've struggled with. Sometimes the Illinois Arts Council will broadcast grant funding opportunities for others. Um, yeah, I'd have to think more about some of the other options because I'm just not a big fan of most of the paid opportunities. But searching for grants, um, I use Google search a lot. I look at Arts Midwest, some of the other regional arts associations as well to see what they have on their pages. Um, Looking at who is awarding grants. So when my colleagues get a grant at an entity, if it's an organization I haven't heard of, I take a look at it. Um,
Great, great. Just a few more questions, and we have time to read maybe one or two of them. Here's one. I hopped on midway through, so I apologize for being late. What are your, I guess I didn't have to read that. What are your thoughts on reaching out to new funders for a short call to introduce our program before submitting an LOI application? Question mark. It seems some are okay with this and some do not prefer it. I don't want to risk chances of funding in the beginning before we even submit. There we go.
if they say don't contact don't contact. If a funder is not going to fund you because you initiate a phone call, that's probably not the type of funder you want to have a long-term relationship with. But that's my own personal um, philosophy because I fully believe in trust-based and relationship building. And so I like to look for the funders who welcome phone calls or setting meetings or having webinars or being accessible and open to the public. That's the only way they get to learn about the community. Um, if someone is open to a call, absolutely take advantage of that. If they're open to questions, absolutely do that. If they're not, then it becomes a matter of building that relationship with them through other ways. And it might be that you attend Mosaic, for example, and you end up meeting some of the program staff at some of these other foundations and let the relationship build naturally. But I think when you're starting out, it really is paying attention to who wants to talk to me and focus your energies there.
We have Edie raised her hand. I'll ask her to come off mute.
Hello. Uh, just a quick question. Our organization operated a diverse revenue model and with a significant portion coming from space rental. However, we intentionally provide this space at the lower below market value, market rate to support our community. So in that case, do you offer any grant per organization that functions as a subsidized community hub, which means uh, we offer very discount rental rate to local nonprofit or individuals to develop our grassroots groups. So we essentially provide the social subside. So how can we best reflect this foregoing revenue as a community impact to our grant in our grant application?
So I think you have a couple of questions there. Just to be clear, I don't offer grants, but I do help organizations apply for grants. And in that type of dynamic, general operating support grants, you can use those for anything. And
Okay.
so you can use that to offset your expenses in providing below market rate uh, rent to organizations that support the community. As far as grants that specifically support subsidized community hubs, I would look at community development grants
Mm,
because what I see in being that hub is your organization is helping build the community by providing below market rate rent. It's allowing these smaller organizations to thrive. And it may hinge on what types of organizations they are. So, for example, if you are allowing organizations to have cheap rent or free rent that provide critically needed direct services to a community that lacks services, that'll be a stronger story. But I think I would look at community development grants and always general operating support grants. You describe the benefit you're creating for the community, and you can use general operating support grants for anything that you need to use it for.
okay, thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And that nearly puts us to the end here. And there were a couple extra questions in the chat. And what we'll do, I think, if you can agree to it, John, is I'll share those with you. Maybe you can type out a short response and we'll include that in our resources. I think that may be the best way. I want to respect everyone's time, and I want to make sure that we get in a little bit of a survey here because it's very helpful for us to continue to improve this program. So please, for those of you who can hang on, please hang on to the webinar here. But thank you so much, John Bateman from nonprofit Sanity LLC. We appreciate all the great work that you do with us and with our members, and just continued giving all your expertise and to this community. And we really appreciate what a great conversation today. But Pooja, if we want to just go ahead and start the quick survey, I appreciate everyone's time, and just we'll get through this very quickly. The first one is, how relevant was this session to your role at work? Very, somewhat, neutral, slightly not relevant. And while we do that, I'm going to share our next session that is coming up here. Next question, overall, how would you rate this session? Excellent, very good, good, fair? So come join us in 2 weeks, Thursday, March 26th at 10 a.m. for financial storytelling. This next question, we'll give a few extra seconds. It's a short response, please. What is one idea, tool, or insight from this session that you plan to apply or explore further? We'll give, like I said, we'll give a few extra seconds here. Again, meet us in 2 weeks, Thursday, March 26th, 10 a.m. right here, and same place. And financial storytelling, that will be with Yvonne P. Affable and Jill Villanueva. They've given 1 or 2 webinars already, so please join us for that. Next question. Thank you for hanging on with us here. What would you like to learn more about related to this topic? And this is a multiple choice here, a deeper dive, practical examples or case studies, tools, templates, or resources, opportunities for discussion or peer learning, a different but related topic. I believe we have one more question after this. All right, final question. After this session, how confident do you feel about applying what you learned? Much more confident, somewhat more, no change, or less confident? All right, that's it. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you everyone for joining us for this session of Meeting the Moment. Again, thank you, John Bateman from Nonprofit Sanity LLC. And we look forward to seeing everyone in 2 weeks again for financial storytelling. I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.